Welcome everyone, hope you're ready for another spooktacular Halloween in 2021. Oh sorry. But anyways, Halloween is the best time of the year to be watching all your favorite horror classics. Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, The Shining, all the usual stuff. But this year I think you guys should change your routine a little bit and watch some horror films you probably haven't seen yet. There's a lot of good ones still coming out, and many of them you probably don't even know existed. So for this video, I'm about to give you 5 recommendations for recent horror films of the past few years that I view are way underappreciated by the public, whether they were critically acclaimed films that just didn't catch on, poorly marketed or distributed films that went through hell to get released, or movies that just people hated and that I think deserve a little bit more love. Here are my top 5 recent overlooked horror films you should watch this Halloween. Number 5. Freaky. While 2020's horror slasher meets comedy film was praised by critics and audiences, it unfortunately came out in, well, 2020. Making only $9 million in the box office in the States, it seemed to slip by audiences. But I later watched it on streaming, and I have to say, the reviews are correct. Freaky is a goddamn blast. It's hilarious, gory, and really clever with its spin on the classic switcheroo formula seen in Freaky Friday, Big, or vice versa. Directed by Christopher Landon, responsible for the Happy Death Day series, Freaky is also a take on a classic trope, but with a slasher movie edge to it. Kathryn Newton plays Millie, a high school girl who gets picked on in class, but then is stabbed by a serial killer in town called the Butcher, played by Vince Vaughn, with a blade that has the magical ability to switch the bodies of the victim and the killer. The next morning, Millie wakes up in the body of the Butcher in Millie's body, and hijinks ensue as the two must fight to the death to reverse the process and return to normal. Now, you might hear that plot and think it sounds like a lame take on a pretty overdone formula, but in terms of execution, Freaky plays it off brilliantly. Vince Vaughn is absolutely perfect in this movie, playing both a deranged serial killer and a shy, nervous high school girl in the best way possible. The same goes for Kathryn Newton, who plays both roles with plenty of charisma and intimidation. The film also features some brutal death scenes, which will satisfy most horror fans, but there's also plenty of heart in the film as well. I love the side characters in the film, most of the gags involving the sex change are great, and it also has a decent amount of character development too. This is definitely the most accessible film on the list, so if you haven't watched Freaky yet, definitely check it out and see it for yourself. Number 4. Wrong Turn 2021. This was a film that, as far as I'm concerned, nobody asked for. A reboot/remake of the horror series that people barely remember? This sounds like a train wreck. And apparently most critics and audiences agreed that when it was released. So I had no intention of watching the film myself, but when I heard my friends say the movie was actually pretty good, I decided I'd give it a rental and see what was up. And at the 20-minute mark of this movie, I was hooked. Not only is this movie not what I was expecting it to be at all, I think it's one of the few horror reboots that actually exceed what the original did. And one of the best things about this reboot is that it barely has anything to do with the original films, so it allows itself to have its own identity. The villains in this movie are completely different. The tone and style are way better realized and consistent, and it also has a lot more complexity than you'd think. As far as the film's plot goes, it's a little similar to the first film, where a group of hikers are going on a trip through the Appalachian Mountains, but are then stalked and hunted by a group of killers, this time the Foundation, and they must find a way to escape and survive. Replacing the usual redneck cannibals that the other films had, the Foundation has a very interesting backstory and are incredibly intimidating and intelligent, especially the leader of the group, Venable, played by Bill Sage, who is one of the better villains in a horror film I've seen in a while. Another thing I love about the movie is how unpredictable it is. You think the movie is going to do one thing with a certain character or group of characters, and it does something else entirely. There's one character in the beginning you think is going to be one of the antagonists, but then you realize he's actually a very well-rounded person who wants to help the heroes. The film actually respects the audience and doesn't treat them like idiots. There's plenty of great misdirections and twists that keep you engaged to the very end, and I mean the very end. Watch until the end of the credits. Wrong Turn 2021 is a film that got the very short end of the stick, and I think it deserves a second notice. It's smart, horrifying, suspenseful, something I think this franchise needed desperately. Number 3. Saint Maud. A24 produces some truly masterful, unique, and subtle films, and while many of them get attention from movie fans, some fall through the cracks. Saint Maud, directed by Rose Glass, is definitely one of those films. Following a young religious nurse played by Morfydd Clark, Maud is tasked with caring for a dying woman and in the process becomes obsessive in her ambition for the power to heal and falls down into a long pit of self-righteousness and torture. This film, like a lot of A24 films, is moody, slow-paced, and patiently shot. But when the horrifying events happen, it's truly unsettling and spine-tingling. The performances from the main two leads are top-notch, portraying a sense of sorrow, regret, and obliviousness to the pain that they are causing themselves. Watching the film reminded me of great horrors like The Exorcist, Hereditary, existing in that small area that delves into the religious and psychological horror that few films ever dare to try. After watching this film, you won't put on a shoe comfortably for days. Trust me. You won't. Some might dislike the ending for the bizarre choices it makes, and religious viewers will definitely not take to some of its messages very well, but I believe it's the perfect dark ending to a dark story. Saint Maud is a horrifying nightmare, but it's one you won't want to turn away from. Number 2. The Night House. This is another horror film of recent that while critics praised it, audiences kinda passed on it without consideration, while others just kinda hated it. A real shame I feel because this film aims high and hits the mark, and is one of the most unique haunted house movies you'll ever see. The story is about Beth, played by remarkable Rebecca Hall, who is in heavy grief over the suicide of her husband. She has a hard time talking to her friends about it, and believing that she knew her husband deep down and can't let go of him. But as strange instances start to happen in her house, Beth starts to find hidden secrets about her husband, what he had been doing all that time, and what she is afraid of that has now taken a life of its own. Before I saw the film, I predicted it would be just a fun, well-acted ghost go bump the night type of horror film, but what I saw was so unlike what I predicted. The Night House is layered richly with themes of depression, grief, suicide, and betrayal, as well as brilliant visuals to get them across. In fact, this film might be filled too much with clever visuals, as there's so much throughout the film that you can find and analyze that connects to what the film really means, as well as be horrified by. But really, the glue to this whole film is Rebecca Hall, who gives perhaps the best performance of her entire career here. Going from one emotion to the next in seconds, she instantly brings you into the moment that her character is going through. It is brutally honest and realistic about the effects of loss and grief, and what it can do to a person physically and mentally at the same time. Directed by David Bruckner, this is easily the career best for him, balancing drama and horror together perfectly. There's a scene in this film that literally had me jumping out of my seat, involving a quiet conversation between two characters and then changing on a dime to something else. One of the most effective uses of the jump scare I have ever seen. Since the film just came out not too long ago, I really don't want to spoil too much about it, but just know that this is not the movie you think it will be when you turn it on. You will be very surprised by many of the moments, and it may not fully satisfy you, but it will have you thinking about it long after it's over. The film will be out on video by October 19th, so do yourself and David Bruckner a favor and experience this mind-bending haunted house ride. Number 1. The Empty Man. From the start of production to release, director David Prior fought an almost impossible battle to get the film he wanted to make. To explain the history of the film, The Empty Man is the directorial debut for David Prior, a horror film with influences of David Fincher, who worked with Prior on behind the scenes, and the styles of H.P. Lovecraft, which is incorporated into the film's cosmic elements. It's an incredibly ambitious project with so many themes, different meanings, and not to mention the final film is nearly 2.5 hours long. While the film was in production under 20th Century Fox in 2017 through 2018, however, many of the film's producers and financiers had to leave the project because of the Disney-Fox merger. After completing the film in post-production, the film was shown to the new producers in test screenings, and to little surprise, they hated it. They ordered the incredibly long film to be cut down, changed, and essentially stripped of its identity so it would fit with their terms. This kept happening for years, and then the pandemic happened and the studio had no idea what to do with The Empty Man. What ended up happening was the film was kept exactly the same as Prior wanted it, but there was practically no marketing for it except for one brief trailer that misleads you about what the film is. It was dumped into theaters and was a colossal failure with critics and audiences. And like that, the film pretty much faded it into nothing and was forgotten about, until it went on streaming. Word of mouth about the film started slowly circling around the internet. Big reviewers like Chris Stuckman released a long video explaining the film, and eventually it was given a release on HBO Max, which significantly helped the film reach more people. The film as of now can be called a cult classic, and in my opinion is something that I think is going to be talked about for years, if not decades. The Empty Man is a movie that I have thought about ever since I first watched it, and I have watched it several more times. And it is staggering to me that we have a film this deep, this complex, and this borderline insane that somehow survived studio interference and could have easily ruined it and turned it into another Slender Man or Bye Bye Man. But no, thankfully that is not what this film is at all. And I need to state once again that this is the director's first feature film, by the way. This was made on a modest budget of $15 million, and it's unbelievable. The locations, the sound design, the cinematography, and the use of visual effects here are downright inspiring. I've seen experienced directors make films that haven't looked or sounded remotely as good as this one. To briefly summarize what the film is, it follows James Lasombra, played by James Badge Dale, a former cop who's basically lost everything he's ever loved. His family was taken in a car accident on a bridge, and he's barely holding it together with the few he has. But when someone he knows goes missing, he goes on a hunt to find her and discovers the secrets of what many people refer to as the Empty Man, an entity that is called upon when someone on a bridge blows into a bottle. After it's called, the next 3 days it starts slowly getting into the person's mind till you hear it, then you see it, and finally it kills you. The way I describe the film is it's like a great combination of The Ring, Rosemary's Baby, and Seven. It's an incredibly clever mix of mystery thrillers, supernatural horror, and cosmic science fiction. This is in no way a standard horror film, which is why many people might not get into it as much. Like The Night House, The Empty Man is heavy on themes, ideas, and visuals, regarding the ability of thought and concentration, the trauma of loss and guilt, and finally the question of all reality and existence. A film that's so layered and complex like this is incredibly rare, probably not since the days of Kubrick or Lynch. I know I'm building this up a lot, but I'm being completely real and honest with you. It is a miracle that we have a film that's this ambitious, this technically well made, and just downright interesting. It might have flaws, it might not be the best horror film of the decade so far, but by God, it needs more attention than it's gotten. Please. We need more films like The Empty Man.